Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we are talking about 5 Shadows of the Galaxy card that murdered Spark of Rebellion cards. So as you can see, I have a new microphone, and hopefully the quality is significantly better than in my previous videos. And today I wanted to do something a little bit more relaxing than just talking about like competitive decks. And but first of all, let's agree on what I mean by murdering. So basically, a card is murdered when it gets replaced in the meta by a better card serving the same role and is unlikely to see play again regardless of the meta. So basically just a card simply replace an existing card in the same role. So some card just gets power creeped out of the game simply because they were just not that very strong to begin with and just get power creeped out. That's not really being murdered. Like for example, if there's a card like Swoop Racer, well now people don't play Swoop Racer anymore because you can simply play DJ or Toro or other like better 3-drops. There's just better 3-drops available. It's not really that there's the exact same card with the exact same role that basically kind of killed the card. It's more that there's just the card just naturally got power creeped out of the game. So that's not really being murdered because the cards are kind of different, and it's just like the normal process of being replaced by better card. And some card just aren't as useful in the current meta. That's also not being murdered. So if a card is still a very good card, but simply is just not very well suited for the meta, not very well positioned for the meta, then it's once again, it's not really being murdered because if the meta comes around, the card could eventually come back. I think a good example for this would be Traitorous. Traitorous is indeed a card that I think is not very well positioned in the current meta. There's a lot of anti-upgrades. Almost everybody runs anti-upgrades in their main or the sideboard. And some of the best card in the expansion, Podamron, has the ability to destroy upgrades. So any expensive upgrade becomes a lot more difficult to play. That's also kind of like a meta shift, not really kind of like the idea of being murdered. So to be murdered, a card doesn't necessarily need to be strictly worse than another card, just functionally worse. So it's not necessarily because sometimes card get murdered by other cards that are not necessarily strictly better. That can happen as well. So now that we kind of agreed on the different things, let's talk about first my honorable mention. And my honorable mention is that Podamron, in my opinion, murdered Steadfast Battalion. So the reason why I don't put this in my top 5 and it is only an honorable mention is because even though effectively Podamron has replaced Steadfast Battalion in most decks, it is definitely a lot more nuanced than this because obviously the two cards are completely different colors. There's still some decks out there which are going to be playing Steadfast Battalion. I still believe Steadfast Battalion is playable in Shadow of the Galaxy, even though I think it's only temporary and I don't think this situation is going to last for very long. But yeah, effectively Steadfast Battalion does see tremendously less play than Podamron, because Podamron effectively does better than Steadfast Battalion. But obviously they're different colors, so there's still deck that cannot run red will still sometimes play Steadfast Battalion. Both cards serve kind of the same role in the sense that they are kind of big mid-range cards that are meant to be used in combination with Energy Conversion Lab to take down very large targets in one hit. Obviously, Podamron is far more flexible, far more powerful in terms of raw power, has better stats. Of course, this is going to be in the situation where Battalion can be better, but functionally, as I said, it's not strictly better, but functionally, Podamron is a better card. My number 5 is Pap Return, which in my opinion murdered the Emperor's Legion. So the Emperor's Legion was essentially a sideboard card that was played by green-black decks in order to counter hard control decks. Yes, with Emperor's Legion you can get back multiple units, while Pap Return can only bring back one card. But most of the time you would just simply use the Emperor Legions in combination with very powerful threats like Vader or Relentless in order to be able to play them again. So it was actually most of the time it was just better value and easier to simply use Emperor's Legion to get back a single big units. And Pap Return does that, but much better, because Pap Return can, if you play Pap Return on a unit that costs 6 or less, you effectively get Pap Return for free. You get to play the unit back for free. While the Emperor's Legion, you have to pay 2 and then pay the price of the card. Also, Emperor's Legion has to be played the turn the unit has been defeated, while Pap Return can be used afterwards, meaning that Pap Return is just so much easier to use. On top of being better value in terms of resources. And not only that, it also can return things that are bigger, that cost 8 or less. So obviously Pap Return is not the power card that I think it's going to eventually become in the future, as we get more discard outlet, but for now it is a very strong sideboard card against control whenever you're running the black-green shell. And functionally for that purpose, it completely replaces the Emperor's Legion. I don't see any reason to play the Emperor's Legion now that Pap Return is here. Obviously, once again, there's going to be niche situation where Emperor's Legion might be better, but most of the time Pap Return is just a far better card. And therefore, will eventually, is effectively replacing it. My number 4 is Pillage, and in my opinion, Pillage murdered Forced Surrender. So, gonna grant you that Forced Surrender, not a card that see a tremendous amount of play at the moment, but remains, in my opinion, a card that did see quite a bit of play on, at least in the sideboard. And in my opinion, there's not really any more reason to play Forced Surrender now that Pillage is available. Pillage is, the fact that Pillage costs 4 instead of 6 is a very big deal. It does maintain the most important part of the card, which is the discard 2. The draw 2 is nice, but for the amount of inconveniences that you have to go through in order to get it, it's very annoying. So in my opinion, Forced Surrender was unconditional. There's just six resources, draw 2, discard 2. I think Forced Surrender would be an excellent card and arguably even a better card than Pillage. But what makes Forced Surrender a lot worse is the fact that you need to have dealt damage to the enemy base in order to play it. And this on its own is not really a big deal because dealing damage to enemy base is not difficult for most decks. But the problem is that it means that you cannot play Forced Surrender as your first action. You have to play an action first to deal damage and then play Forced Surrender afterward. And that timing differences means everything, because whenever you are on top deck mode and both players are drawing 2 cards per turn, Pillage can simply be played as your first action and you can discard the 2 remaining cards your opponent has. While with Forced Surrender, deal 1 damage to your opponent base, your opponent will likely be able to play one of the 2 cards and then play Forced Surrender, only discard 1 card as a result. And more importantly, the most important card your opponent's hand has been played before Forced Surrender was able to be used. So Forced Surrender is simply just very difficult to use. When it works, it is amazing, and just the sheer card advantage that it gives is still very valuable, but probably the only scenario in which you would want to play Forced Surrender would be in addition to a Pillage. And for now, I believe that for the most part, Pillage has effectively murdered Forced Surrender. I believe that we're not going to see much Forced Surrender anymore, mostly because of Pillage. Even though, of course, there might be some very niche scenario where someone might want to play both, if he's playing like a dedicated discard deck. Not that those decks have been particularly powerful, but it's still an option that is available. Number 3, we got a pretty obvious one. It is obviously Phase 3 Dark Trooper, who murdered Cell Block Guard. Cell Block Guard was a card that saw a tremendous amount of play in Spark of Rebellion, which is very surprising for a card that on paper is not that impressive, and but it turns out that Villainy really needed a Sentinel unit in this cost. So you could argue there's other Sentinel units, like for example the Pike Sentinel, also helped kind of push the Cell Block Guard out of the meta. But I think the biggest offender is by far Phase 3 Dark Trooper. It is effectively kind of the same card, but Phase 3 Dark Trooper as an additional upside, which can be quite significant. So obviously, Phase 3 Dark Troopers can only be played in a green-black deck, while Cell Block Guard can be played in a wider diversity of different decks. But most of the decks that wanted to play defensive and want to have that kind of units are usually going to be black-green decks. So in the vast majority of the case, uh, those decks are being black-green deck anyway. And the main reason to play Cell Block Guard at the first place was because it was a very good card to pull out of Darth Vader. And Phase 3 Dark Trooper, of course, being in the same color as Vader means that there's literally no reason to run Cell Block anymore. You would just run Phase 3 Dark Trooper instead. Yeah, so yeah, very unlikely the Cell Block Guard will ever see play again. And I think it's only going to get worse as we get more card. Next one, a bit of a more controversial one. Some people might disagree with me, but in my opinion, Rey murdered Luke Skywalker as a leader. So, basically, if I compare both leaders, they both do something very similar. They have this pay 1 ability that boosts a unit. In one hand, you give experience, on the other hand, you give shield. They both like force unit that comes on 6, though they're very, very similar. They're in the same color combination. And Rey, but the big difference is that Rey has a restore 3 and Luke Skywalker doesn't. So, and that's obviously a massive, massive difference because the restore 3, in my opinion, is one of the strongest keyword in the game. So, obviously Luke Skywalker does have a few things to make up for that. He has better stats, 4-7 instead of 2-6, but Rey can turn herself into a 3-7 very easily. And there's not that big of a difference between a 3-7 and a 4-7. Luke Skywalker has access, enables Luke's lightsaber, which is a very good card. Luke Skywalker is a rebel, which is relevant. And he has the ability to... And shield, arguably, generally speaking, is better than experience tokens. On this, I would argue against it. I would say that it is true that, generally speaking, shield is better than experience, but in the context of a blue-white deck, I don't think that's true most of the time, because a lot of blue-white units are already shielded, or they have very high health value and very low attack value. So shielding, for example, like a 4-1 or a 4-3 can be very powerful, but shielding a 2-4, not as valuable. I think if I was I would prefer to give an experience tokens. So basically, blue-white units have a tendency to have low attack, high health, which means that on those units, generally speaking, experience token is more valuable than shield. So for all those reasons, I even find Rey's ability a bit more useful than Luke's ability most of the time. Also, Rey's ability can be used on any unit that has 2 or less attack, 2 or less power, which is once again very easy to do, while Luke Skywalker can only be used on unit that just entered play this turn, and also have to be heroism. So overall, I find Rey's ability to be actually slightly better. So basically, Luke Skywalker main upsides really, really Luke's lightsaber and kind of better stats out of the gate, but Rey has so many more advantages, especially, of course, the most important one is the Restore 3 is absolutely massive. So obviously, Rey doesn't really see that much play right now, because people prefer to play Han Blue for very good reason. I think the new Han Blue is better than Rey Red. It's basically the next evolution. It is definitely a better deck. But I think that if you're ever going to be playing a Luke Skywalker deck, you would probably be better off just replacing it by a Rey, especially if you're going to go for something that is not including red. For example, if you want to run a Luke Green, you're better off just running a Rey Green. I mean, yes, you got the dispatcher. Giving a shielded dispatcher can be good, but in a lot of situations, giving an experience to the dispatcher is going to be enough to survive. So there's a couple of things, of course, in favor of Luke, but overall, the upsides of Rey are tremendously higher, in my opinion. And in my number 1, there is Rival's Fall. And in my opinion, Rival's Fall murdered Vanquish. Basically, Rival's Fall can defeat any unit in the game, including leaders, and that upside is well worth the extra cost that you're paying for it. So we've seen people. So why is it so good to defeat leader? Well, defeating leaders is so good because leaders are usually relatively large units, which mean that spending an entire turn to kill them is very worth it in a lot of cases. The second reason is that a lot of people have grown to be comfortable putting upgrades on leaders because leaders are usually more difficult to interact with. Rivals Fall answers that, no matter how big the leader is. And I would say that the role of Rivals Fall and Vanquish is to be a kind of a catch-all answer for the later stage of the game. And they're supposed to be defeating stuff that are usually more expensive than they are. So the price is not super relevant because, generally speaking, those are late game cards anyway. And it's not like you're going to be able to play a lot of great stuff with a 1 resource discount. And that's the other argument that makes me want to say that Rivals Fall is a better card than Fell the Dragon, even though I think both cards have their merit and both should see some amount of plays. But for the Vanquish, it is undeniable that Rivals Fall, or whether you prefer Rivals Fall or Fell the Dragon, Rivals Falls, either of those cards basically murder Vanquish. I don't think there's any reason to play Vanquish nowadays, now that you have access to Rivals Falls and Fell the Dragon, unless you are already running both of those cards and want to have a bit more diversity. If you're running like a mono blue control deck or any sort of control deck for that matter, then Vanquish can be an option. But most of the time, for the most part, Vanquish is going to be a super niche card, and Rivals Fall and Fell the Dragon, but especially Rivals Fall, is going to be the card that's going to see play in every single deck. And that's kind of a big deal because Vanquish, people don't necessarily remember, but just take a look at the deck list of all the blue decks that you would see making result in Spark of Rebellion, and you will see that almost all of them are going to be running a certain amount of Vanquishes either in the main deck and sideboard. So we are talking about a card that was basically seeing play in almost every single blue deck, and now this card is out of the game almost completely. So that's why I put this murder as the #1 murder of Shadow of the Galaxy. So obviously, so that's it for this video. Once again, it's kind of a small, kind of fun video to talk about, kind of reflect on the evolution of the game, and I think it's always very interesting. And obviously, I'm planning to make similar videos for every single upcoming expansions. So thank you so much for this video, for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Just a reminder that I will be casting the UK tournament circuit this weekend on my channel, so stay tuned for more information about this, and I'll see you next time.